Hey, it's me. It's Ethan instead of Gunner. Welcome in. This is Chat with Ethan. You guys probably aren't necessarily looking to listen to me for an hour and a half. Hopefully not an hour and a half. Maybe it's just an hour. We'll see. But welcome in. It is Chat with Ethan, otherwise known as Chat with Gunner. You can find us at YouTube, right here. You can find us at Apple Podcast. You can find us at Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Google Podcast. Anywhere you want to listen to us, make sure you go to Apple Podcasts, leave a like, leave a 5-star rating, because we're at currently 69 reviews. We're wanting to hit 100. Once we hit 100, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, we hit 100. Doesn't seem to be helping us at all. But that's being said, I decided that because Gunner's out, he's probably currently fighting a grizzly bear in Yellowstone for his birthday, because Tia is a great woman and decided to gift him with that for Valentine's Day and his birthday. That leaves me here at the studio all alone, where I basically live. And I couldn't think of anything to talk about, so I decided that I would bring on a friend of mine from Australia. His name is Kavoth, at least his alias is. I'm sure he works for the government, so he can't tell me his real name. But me and Kavoth have played D&D, been nerds for... How long has it been, Kavoth?
It's since late 2017.
Yeah, it's been a while. And this guy, I gotta tell you, this guy is much smarter than I am. And he's got a brain filled with all of this different stuff that I couldn't even imagine what is all in there. I think you've mentioned before, Kavoth, you're going for engineering in college.
Yes,
engineering.
I'm studying engineering at university.
So
robotics, essentially.
Robotics. Ugh, good lord, that's complicated stuff. I mean, like you can't just say one day, I want to make a robot, and then make a robot, right? You spend years doing that.
For a given project is usually going to be multiple months long. It's a bit of a synthesis discipline, because you're making the actual structure of your robot. You're using your toolbox. You're putting it together using a 3D printer, and you're also having to teach you how to do anything. So you got to program the computer on it.
Yeah, program everything. Here, look at me. I'm just an editor, and I feel like half the time I'm doing rocket science, and it's way over my head. But I can't imagine. You mentioned 3D printing your robots. Mm-hmm. Like, is that like when 3D printing came around? Like, was that like the big thing? Is that like the new? Like, you don't have to worry about anything now. You just got to make it in a 3D modeling software, and you just make it and you print it out and you just pop it right into your robot, right?
It's a technology that's taken a while to mature, but these days, yeah, that's pretty much the process. I make a model, and there's a few things you have to keep in mind when you're designing for a 3D printer. There are certain kinds of overhangs and shapes that it can't do very well. But with those in mind, I just make a model, I put it on an SD card, take it down to the basement, and put it in the 3D printer, and 5 hours later, I have a finished part.
So yeah, I guess that's really like the bottleneck of your of making stuff nowadays is how long is it going to take to print, right?
It's delightful because that's not a bottleneck, because the printer's doing that, you're doing other things. You're doing other parts of the design, programming things.
So I mean, I've dabbled in like 3D modeling, 3D printing. So I mean, what's the how long would you say how long would you take if you had infinite resources, infinite money to make a fully functional robot? And I must ask, if you were to make said robot, what would you need that? What would you personally, Kavoth, make that robot do?
That's a tricky one. So how long it would take to make a robot given endless resources is mostly going to be limited by um, design time and probably the programming. The programming will be the biggest bottleneck, because it is very difficult to teach a computer to do anything complicated. Um, it's like teaching a deck of cards to play cards. The project that I would pick under that circumstance, which is it's actually a little bit topical because I am going into a final year project in my university course. Um, the project I would pick would probably be um, an an ornithopter survey machine.
Okay, okay.
So we've got so word by word. You know how drones are a thing these days.
Yes, of
You
course.
can make a machine that flies by flapping its wings.
Okay.
Um, that's what an ornithopter is, a machine that flies by flapping its wings like a bird. These things have been developed, robotic ones have been developed and used for example, scaring pigeons away from airports. Um,
You just scare away pigeons with a mechanical bigger pigeon.
a fake eagle
Oh
with a
my
fake bird of
gosh.
prey.
That's
It's been done.
awesome.
It's not exactly widespread though. And part of the reason I'd want to make something like that is, it would be useful. Like drones do a lot of the same job. Um, Drones have quite a limited battery life,
Okay.
so I would very much enjoy investigating the lowest power end of flying machines.
That makes sense.
And
I
you make
mean,
you make something that flies under its own power for days, especially if it uses all the terrain features that birds do. If it finds updrafts and thermals and all that jazz.
this seems way over my head. Again, for those of you listening, Kavath is one of those people that we've had a few conversations that have gone into like the hour-long conversations about literally anything and everything, which I find there's not a lot of people I can do that with. A lot of people will just shy away from having long conversations, but I find that Kavath, you're just this gem amongst all the people that we've known through playing D&D and through all of this and that just has this encyclopedia of knowledge. And I will say this: you're playing D&D. Obviously, there's a lot of rules. There's books upon books upon books of rules. I have found that you are one of the only people I've ever known that I can just be like, "Hey, what's the rules say on whatever have you?" And Kavoth just has it like that. It's amazing. But here's something I've always wanted to ask you, and to give a little bit of backstory for those listening at home. We play through a system called Discord. It's like Skype. It's phone calls via the internet. But something that I've always wondered, and I'm sure you've talked about it before, Kavath. Kavath, you have this fascination, and especially with what you just said about what your robot would do, you have this fascination with birds. And I find it fascinating because, again, you're this very, very smart guy, but it's just this one quirk that you have that it's not really a quirk in a bad sense. It's just one of these things that you just have this theme and you run with it, and I appreciate that. But I've got to ask, why birds, and specifically why owls? Because you seem to be very fascinated with owls, and no, again, not taking anything away, owls are fascinating, but you've got this thing, and I've got to ask where it comes from.
Deep in the past yonder, it the first thing that comes to mind is walking around campus at secondary school, at high school. There were a lot of different kind of birds that lived there. There were Australian magpies, rock doves, so feral pigeons of all stripes. There were mudlarks and occasionally cockatoos, etc. And at my secondary school, the buildings were pretty spread apart, and there was just a lot of walking between them. Owl specifically, it is part of. It's a little strange. It's part of the branding, the identity that I have put together for. Well, I suppose the internet. Like people pick handles when you're young. You often pick a name that you want to throw away later. Um, Here, for example, Ethan knows I use a barn owl as an avatar icon. Um, and the other part of why this association might be so strong is I just so happened to play a very owlish character in Ethan's campaign, in the D&D campaign, which lasted for so long.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. No. To dive a little bit into D&D, just because I'm sure Gunner's going to listen back to this and be like, "I have no idea what he's talking about," but we'll listen anyway because it's my show. Our D&D again. We started in 2017, late 2017, and we didn't end that one story and that one game until what was it? 3 months ago. Not even.
Something on the order of 150 sessions. So
Yeah.
something on the order of 600 hours.
God, you didn't have to put it in statistics like that for me. I didn't need to know that's how much time I've spent thinking about one story for that long. Good Lord. Yeah, no. Oh, man. Which, of course, we did skip a few weeks. There was, 3 or 4 months a couple summers ago that one of our guys wasn't able to play, so we didn't really play. So I mean, yeah, gosh, that's again, it's fascinating that it's been that long. But moving on, I think there's something that we've talked about a few times, but I find that you have a very interesting standpoint, if not just outlook on things. But I think we had this conversation about just the I think it was as I was watching this video on YouTube, which you guys should check out. I think it's called The Timeline of Everything. And it just shoots us forward, shoots the universe into like the billions upon trillions upon quadrillions of years into the future. And it's just fascinating. And I'm sure all of the sports and wrestling fans that watch this podcast are super excited right now that we're talking about space and engineering and birds. But hey, you're getting a podcast this week, so it is what it is. Again, Gunner's probably fighting a grizzly bear. I think he just punched it in the face. No, he just got clawed in the arm. Oh, no. But, Cloth, we've had this conversation about time and all of this and that, going into the future, space travel. But I want to ask you, because it's always an interesting question. It keeps the conversation going. If you could go to any point in history and just take a snapshot, not be there, you just want to take a picture of one thing in all of time, what would you take a picture of? To keep, and you could have it and show people and have it forever, but you know that it's factual, you know that it's real. What would you take a picture of?
I'm not particularly well versed in history, sadly. The first things that come to mind are the momentous but lost vistas that have been part of human society. So the first thought is the Great Pyramids in their full glory before any decay. We know a little bit about what they looked like, and enough to reconstruct, for example, for one of the Assassin's Creed games, that had a gold-capped. They were gold-capped pyramids with white limestone, I think it was.
I think if I remember correctly, yes, it was limestone with gold caps on the top, and the brick or the stone that you see of the pyramids now are like 1 or 2 layers down or something like that, or maybe they're still the same limestone, but there was at least a layer on top that made it super smooth, and it was just a straight shot downwards, but now you see like the stair step down. That would be fascinating.
The
Speaking,
other thought
go ahead.
would be a photograph of some of the very early cities that we know almost nothing about. The city of for example.
Where was that?
That was in the Levant, so the Middle East,
Okay.
back in the time of the Akkadians and the Sumerians.
That does sound fascinating.
Thousands of years BC. The earliest writing we know.
Oh yeah, Lord. But I just thought about how fascinating is it that even video games nowadays are trying to be as historically accurate as like the Assassin's Creed games are. Because I didn't wasn't it when the Cathedral of Notre Dame, when it burned, the the people at Ubisoft, the people that make Assassin's Creed, basically I feel like I remember, because this is why I have it, they made Assassin's Creed Unity totally free because it is the last and greatest rendition of the cathedral now that it's burned down. Which is a tragedy, but at the same time, it fascinates me that a video game is the best depiction of something historical.
Video games are unique in that it's a whole industry built around making interactive environments. And so when they're trying to be real environments, unlike, for example, in a movie or whatnot, a game studio has a lot of incentive to fill in all the details. Ubisoft released a version of... Which Assassin's Creed was it that went to Egypt?
I think it was Origins, so it was not the last one, which was Odyssey, which was Greek, but it was Origins, so yeah, it was the Egyptian one.
They released a version of Origins for use in teaching that uses the assets, the reconstruction of the culture and the time and the landscape to a certain extent. Just as a simple walkthrough, a simple virtual tour.
I think I remember that in Odyssey as well, because I did play that one a little bit. There was an entire mode that, like, when you first open up the game, you don't even have to play the story. It's just an interactive, like, walkthrough of Greece, Athens, Sparta, and all these places, and you stop at different nodes along the way, and you just get told, like, this was the Parthenon. This is where people thought, are believed, at least from writings and etchings that we have, that the Parthenon was used as a meeting place, but also it was a temple to Athena or any of the other Greek gods. That's where I learned that there weren't just like the set Olympians. There was like, and there's Athena, but there's also Athena, another Greek word that's meant for, like, there's an Athena of war, but there's also Athena of tactics and all this and that. And yeah, like, man, it's a far step away from the old video games, from probably everyone that's listening to this that probably has picked up a video game that was trying to teach them something that was just like totally, it wasn't even worth the disc that it was printed on. but yeah, no, I feel like, I don't know about you, Kvav, but I feel like the way that our video games, or at least the interactive media that we're using nowadays, is to such a point that you can make the entire world and have a place in each of the major cities just to stop and oh man, what if there was a video game, a VR video game, that recreated a city from the start of it all the way to the end, like to now, and you could see in different points of views from, like, I'm just thinking maybe like London. So like London, when it first was founded, however long ago it was, and then you see up until the American Revolution period, so the 1700s, and then you see Industrial Age, and then you see during the World Wars, and then you see today, and you can see all the different places and different things. And I think on that, you mentioned the ancient city, but what would be an ancient city that you would want to go to and be a part of, other than because that's just a snapshot.
Go to and be a part of, as in a sort of time travel
Yes.
scenario. Oh.
I definitely find time travel questions to be the most interesting, because then you just get every possible civilization in human history. So, I mean, yeah.
The normal narrative of the early existence of the United States of America is that a lot of the structure of the government and the founding values of it stem from a very small seed, a very very small group of people, wealthy people in that case. That is a place where one participant could make quite a big stamp on the world, or bring back modern political theory if I manage to learn any, for example.
Oh, yeah. So here's a question. You live in Australia, obviously. You you technically live under the rule of the Queen. What is and kind of, very very kind of. You're a lot like Canada, right? You're around the same.
We happen to. We're an independent country, except for the fact that the Queen is on
all of your money. Yeah, makes sense.
Not all that money, no.
Oh, okay. Well, my question is like, what is like the American? Obviously, you guys have your entire country's history, but do you guys learn anything about like? And it sounds very American of me to ask, but do you guys learn about like the American War for Independence? Because I know I've had British friends that have said that they do mention it because it was a major war in the British history, but British history is also 30 times as big as the United States. So it's only like a footnote at the end of a chapter. Like, oh, the Americans fought for their independence and they won, but let's move on. So what's it like in Australia as far as that is concerned? Because you guys are your own independent country, but you were a British colony. So what's that? What does that kind of look like for you guys?
They don't mention any American history in schools.
That's fair. Again, that was a very American question of me. But I'm also very. I didn't grow up in Australia, so I've always wondered like what how much of there is there of crossover? Because I mean, in America at least, we learned probably about the same as what I mentioned before. Like we learned like Australia was X, Y, and Z. You started off as a prison colony, but over the years, you guys have become this entire country that's more unified than certainly the United States, but are now, instead of being a British colony, you guys are your own country, have all your own laws, all your own rules, and are seemingly flourishing, especially after 2020. I just always find it fascinating, So, just moving on, because I know you don't have too much longer. Don't want to take too much of your time out of your day, because it is.
I have plenty of time.
Oh well, good, because I could sit here all night. Yeah, it's only I'm currently filming at. It is 10:05 for me, but it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock for you.
It's 2:05 p.m. over here. It's interesting trying to schedule D&D games across this many time zones difference.
Yeah, Lord.
14 hours difference usually. But the thing is, both sides shift daylight savings times in opposite directions on different dates. So this fixed weekly appointment is at 4 different times across the year.
So, maybe you know, maybe you don't. Why the hell does Australia do daylight savings time, but at the same time, why do they have like a half time? You guys have 4 different time zones, and they're not like left to right. There's like there's left to right, and then in the center, there's like a top and a bottom. I've always been curious. I think we've mentioned this before talking.
There is a half-hour time zone. I'm fairly sure it's for agricultural purposes, because a lot of agricultural stuff needs to happen, relative to the time of day. Dawn and dusk matter a lot for farmers, and daylight savings. What daylight savings does is let you schedule stuff at a fixed time for the whole year and still have it vaguely hit in daylight hours, for the whole of the year. Australia has a reputation as being this hot deserty place, and yes, we've got big deserts, but the south coast, and in fact the south and the east, where a lot of people live, is at a surprisingly low latitude. For example, where I am at the moment, the sun sets at about 8:30 p.m., and the sky is bright enough to see by till 9.
Okay, yeah, that's about the same for us. I think dusk was probably maybe 8 o'clock, 8:30 for us right now. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, going off of what you were saying before with Australia. So Australia, like you said, is known for these deserts and creatures that are trying to kill you. But it seems like on that east coast and the southern coast, like y'all just have cities like everywhere else. It's not like you're fighting off wild animals all the time. You may have this a massive spider once in a while, but what's it like in Australia as far as for us Americans here? Tell me what may be like an interesting part about Australian life, living down under.
Australia shares a little bit with America compared to Europe in terms of travel. I have lived with people who have had a 1.5 hour commute to work, one way each day. Melbourne, for example, as a city, that might be a little different to East Coast US, it sprawls. It has a relatively low population density on average for a city of its size. But one thing Australia definitely has in abundance just about everywhere is land, which is a bit of a problem because the outer suburbs of Melbourne are a long, long way from the CBD. A thing about Australian life, I get a lot of the impression from people I know in America, but especially from the media, of course, however useful that is, that the average ardency or sort of political loudness of a person is a lot lower in Australia. You could say complacent. There's a traditional vibe of, oh, she'll be right, of letting things by. And there is... Well, the other big thing is no guns.
Well, yeah.
Unless you need one for your job.
You know, I think that's very similar to American Southerns. Just because it is obviously, like I'm sure you know, with the current landscape that it is. I'm sure you know that like the South is known for, or at least in the media, again, as much as you can trust that nowadays, the media, portrays the South as either super far right, super red, or just dumb and can't really comprehend what's going on out there. But yeah, a lot of people around here are just like, man, our guy didn't win. He really should have, but I guess we'll just make it. We'll make it somehow. So I find fascinating else that I've noticed is like y'all's media. You can correct me on this, but I feel like Sky News. How reputable is Sky News, by the way? because that's a lot of the Australian news that I see from in America. But I'm sure you have your own personal views, or at least Australians have their own personal views of Sky News. What's it like over there?
The vast majority of our media machine is owned by one person. Rupert Murdoch owns most of the media outlets in the entirety of Australia, and it is a big problem.
Man, I have no idea what that feels like. He doesn't own any in the U.S. either. Yeah, no, that sounds like a terrible problem. Absolutely, like, oh man. But continue.
So going for news, mostly the Australian Broadcasting Company, the ABC, which is government funded but not government run, is pretty reputable. It's of course it gets in jeopardy funding wise for various political reasons. But I have not touched Sky News with a 9-foot pole.
That's fair.
So unfortunately, I don't have a lot to say about it.
I have noticed that Sky News is very right leaning, and people that watch this show know that Gunner may be a red blooded American and wears a certain red hat sometimes, just for the joke at least. But yeah, no, I and me and you are very similar in age, right? You're what, mid-20s? Early 20s. Yeah, again, same age, similar age at least, and I think it's just it's a generational thing. You know, me and you probably don't necessarily agree, but we have similar thought processes of like what is good and what is bad. We just have different ways of getting to X and Y. I think that's just a generational thing. And I think that kind of leads into another question I have: is what is like the generational divides in Australia? Because obviously in America we have what the internet has termed boomers, the baby boomers. Which I don't know if you guys had a baby boom at any point, but after the Great Depression and after the World War II. The baby boomers were the babies born after all the soldiers came back, after we got out of the Depression. Everyone was having an economic boom. So what are you supposed to do in an economic boom? You have a bunch of kids. And so they're our oldest generation. Then you have Gen X, which is my mother's and a lot of old, not as old folks, maybe 50s to their 40s. Maybe the early 60s, I don't know, that are sort of the boomers' kids, or the silent generation, which was the generation before the boomers. And then you have millennials, which everyone knows about a millennial. Everyone knows a millennial at this point. They don't know what they're doing with their lives. Not like Gen Z really knows what they're doing with their lives, which is my generation, your generation. The kids that grew up not necessarily with the internet all the time, but are certainly more internet versed than the other three generations. So what in Australia? What's the generation difference like? Is there a generational difference?
There is a similar vibe. There is a large cohort of people my age and a few years older that are having a lot of trouble finding work, especially since the 2008 financial crisis. It's just been not a particularly good, not particularly useful labor economy. One of the very strong unifying cultural themes or cultural mores of my cohort is a very bleak outlook on the fate of the world. Things are not going well, and that's,
yeah,
that is
I would
the general mood of life.
I would tend to agree.
I haven't observed strong. I haven't observed more than one strong like cohort divide or generational divide here. You have the people who are getting to retirement age, mostly, in places of power, and you have the youngsters trying to fix the climate. Um,
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess the generational differences in America wouldn't necessarily translate for you guys, but yeah, no, Gen Z, and I'm sure the millennials also feel this. I don't know who all is listening at this point, but no, there is definitely a feeling of, I guess, a depression. Not necessarily like a financial depression or a physical depression in America, but there's definitely this air of just like, ugh, just tired. Not and maybe for my generation, it's just the idea that we've grown up in the internet age, an age where I am literally talking to somebody in Australia right now, while recording a video that will eventually go up on a site that has more videos than there are people on this planet, that are uploaded each day. It's fascinating to me that how much gets uploaded on YouTube, but no, so you mentioned that like there's just this lull in morale, I guess is what you could say, in Australia, and I'm sure there are reasons, especially you mentioned climate, and we here at Chat with Gunner are a little divided on climate change, but again, it's one of those things where I think it's just a generational thing. Because me, and you're obviously the science guy that probably knows way more than I do. I am very unversed in climate change. I will be the first to admit that. But I mean, to me, it's one of those things where I feel like, yeah, climate change is definitely a thing, and we need to work towards a better future. Because at this point, I'm 23. I don't want to be making the decisions, but people my age are making those decisions, or are about to start making those decisions, and I hope that that they're at least level-headed enough to look at the science, because the science doesn't necessarily lie. It's the people saying the science that tend to bend the truth. So what's for you, Kavoth? Because again, you're just on the other side of the world. You've got this different perspective on life, and life in Australia is entirely different than life it is in America. What for those of our audience that are listening? What's a main idea you would want to get across as far as climate change? Because you don't have to necessarily like convince people of climate change, because I'm sure everyone's got that little voice in their head saying, maybe we should listen to this guy. So what would you say is like the main like idea that everyone could get on board with as far as climate change, and what could people, not that you're like a climate change activist or anything, but like I'm sure there's something that you got in your mind that's like, oh, this is something that if people only more people knew that I know, that could help them see a little bit more into the ideas that, hey, maybe we should not be burning as much fossil fuel.
the proportion of energy that gets used, and therefore in most countries, fossil fuels that get burnt, for the purposes of domestic uses, of residential uses. So the power you use to power your heating, natural gas you use for your stove, that is a very, very small percentage of all the energy gets used by the economy. Doing all the listed things to make your household is a much worse way to spend your time in service of fixing climate change, than spending that same time and money doing very simple things to put well, the easiest thing is to put political will behind the issue, rather than trying to, for example, run the heating less, or run air conditioning less. Though that is still a useful thing to do. More important would be something like making a phone call or writing a letter to a local representative. There are websites where you can find form letters that you can copy and just print, put in an envelope, send off, or emails you can send. Phone calls work well. There have been multiple instances of this sort of thing actually changing representative stances, because local representatives want votes.
Yeah.
And that is a great way to tell them that you and people like you care about this issue enough to vote about it.
I think it doesn't go without saying, and this is something that I've always thought, especially now that I'm more politically active here in America. I don't know how it breaks down for you in Australia, but voting locally is probably more important than voting for a prime minister or a president at this point. Like, for America, obviously everyone thinks, oh, the president's the president. He's the face of America. But at the same time, you look at it, I mean, we had Donald Trump, and everyone knew who Donald Trump was, and you knew exactly what kind of stuff he was going to say every day. And now with Joe Biden, it's the complete opposite. You don't really hear from him. You don't really hear much about him. He's made a couple appearances. He doesn't really tweet that much, thankfully. But he keeps doing these things, writing, executive orders that not a lot of people are agreeing with on either side at this point. But getting back to my point, vote locally, because I know plenty of people, especially this last election, that looked at their ballot and looked at R or D for the president, voted their way, and then looked at the rest of the ballot and didn't really care what was on it, just voted for random people or the people that are the incumbents. So back on climate change, something I've been a proponent of that I find very interesting, and maybe you have a similar viewpoint, is alternative fuel sources. Because I don't know if you've heard, Texas, the great red state of Texas, here recently, completely froze over. It was like if hell froze over, in fact, and the entirety of Texas had below freezing temperatures, and it was kind of fascinating, actually, being able to sit at home in heat and have my power and internet. But a lot of people were saying here recently that either side's proposed solutions for climate change, because although the right doesn't necessarily believe in climate change, they're still not wanting to pump the world full of carbon emissions. So the right is saying, the red right is saying, wind and solar don't work if the wind turbines don't turn, and the sun isn't out because it's snowing. And then the left is saying, they would work if you only had the correct ones. There are wind turbines in Antarctica. They wouldn't freeze over there. They shouldn't freeze over in Texas. You guys just built them wrong. And then there's me and a lot of Gen Z, and I'm sure plenty of people in the middle that aren't taking sides. They're just like, I've heard about fusion power. What's that like? So, Kavath, what is your take on fusion power? Because I am a very strong proponent of, hey, we have these pieces of metal that just radiate energy. That energy just loves to fly off of them. Why aren't we using these as fuel sources? And obviously the usual suspect is, well, they tend to blow up. And I think both me and you can both agree that out of all of the nuclear power that we have, that is a very small percentage of what has happened over the years.
When you're talking about metals that radiate energy, that is the first. That's most closely related to something like a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. So the little glowing rocks you put inside space probes and send out. And it's slightly less related to fission power, which uses heavy metals, which is what we use in nuclear power reactors today. Fusion uses hydrogen isotopes. It uses a very thin gas to get its power. About the explosions, nuclear power kills a lot less people per unit energy produced than coal power plants. There are very big companies that run coal power plants and have a very vested interest in not letting you know how much environmental damage they do. And that's why it's been such a tragedy that recently Germany has been decommissioning nuclear power plants out of public pressure. There is a Kurzgesagt video.
Oh man, those guys, they do the Lord's work for sure. There is, I'll be sure to link it in the description below if you want to go check out Kurzgesagt. But they're super sciencey. I had once upon a time thought that Kavoth actually worked for them because of his voice and his sultry tones. Continue, Kavoth.
Modern fission power plants are pretty damn safe. They're very, very safe compared to the amount of just the thousands of societal instances of respiratory diseases caused by direct particulate pollution, so soot from coal-fired power plants.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, not knowing if Australia deals with this, but I mean, there are coal towns in America that are now ghost towns because all of the coal dried up. And to put it in a different metaphor, but yeah, no, I think we're not even really scratching the surface of how bad coal was to just mine out of the ground, especially those guys that were down there. I mean, obviously cancers and lung problems and other known diseases that come from being around all of that soot and ash and just dust getting ground up in the air.
It's not just in the working populations, it's also just in the general public, because those big power plants contribute a lot to the smoke, the smog, the haze pollution that you see in big cities. Beijing is very famous for it.
Yeah, no kidding. And that's one of those things where you don't have to talk about this, Kavoth, but I think a lot of people in America have this feeling that a lot of the people that have told Americans, you need to do X, Y, and Z to save the environment, tend to be people that are also large proponents of of a very large country in Central Asia that currently is pumping a lot of things into the air that we in America and Australia and the rest of the Western world currently are not, as well as putting it into the ocean, which is also a very very sad thing to realize. I think currently America is. Maybe I'm wrong. Anybody out there that was listening should definitely go look this up. But I believe I read somewhere that America is currently on a better track to hitting what was in the Paris Accords that Trump did take us out of. We're on a better track than what was projected for 2030 or 2025 or whatever it was, or 2050 maybe. I don't know, but I think although I say that we shouldn't necessarily stop doing what we're doing, But I think, getting back on topic, that I think nuclear power just is the way to go. I don't know. There's something sciencey about it that is obviously definitely over my head. And I'm sure there are plenty of reasons not to do nuclear power. But there seems to be so many upsides. I've never heard a very good argument against nuclear power, all other than fear that is kind of irrational when you look at the statistics of we've been using nuclear power for 60 odd years now, at the very least, and those 60 years, there's only been maybe you can count on one hand the nuclear disasters that came of using nuclear power. Now, we can talk about Project Bravo and or all of these different places where nuclear disasters happened that weren't because of power and were covered up by governments around the world. But those are still so far and few between that it kind of surprises me that there's such this irrational fear in the public of using this energy source that really could kind of power the. I think I read this somewhere that using a certain kind of reactor and enough of an isotope of a certain kind could power the entirety of Texas because it's on its own grid, just by one nuclear power plant.
Individual nuclear power plants can be quite productive. The same is true of most big power technologies, other than wind.
Yeah. I think if I had to choose one that we may just get rid of, I think wind is kind of the one where people have gone a little bit too hard on it, and it's just like, maybe we shouldn't be using wind power because it takes 300 tons of coal to make just one big turbine to put up in the sky, and then when those blades get worn down, you gotta make a bunch of more blades and ship them across the country and then put them up there. And it for some reason, I just and this comes from a small town kid from Iowa who saw wind turbines every single week because I'd pass by them going to my grandparents' house, and it's just like, I mean, they're cool. It's really weird to see them on the horizon, but were they really doing as much as we thought they were at this point?
Wind power is a substantial chunk of the electricity production of actually quite a few countries at the moment. I think it's somewhere between 10 and 20% of South Australia's electricity. It's a lot more reliable than it feels like. A lot of renewables technology, so sunlight, photovoltaics and wind turbines are intermittent energy generation. They don't generate 100% of the time. And inconveniently for solar, the peak energy demand in urban places is in the evening, after the sun has set. So an important part of the system to use renewables to power a country is you need energy storage somehow. This is why there's been big news stories about billion-dollar Tesla batteries commissioned in South Australia. This is why whenever you can find a place where you can do a water power reserve, where essentially you pump water uphill into a basin to store power and then run it through turbines downhill to release it. There was a proposal, though it didn't get followed through on, for that in Australia. Energy storage is how you get wind and solar to do the whole job.
Yeah, I think there's been a few stories here recently, especially in Germany, like you mentioned, that were decommissioning nuclear power, that they actually were importing energy, whether it be from the stores that surrounding countries had, or just using the wind and solar that they were having, a country away, that they were just able to store better than Germany was. And yeah, I mean, I guess if we had, a superconductor that could get all of the energy to one place without losing a bunch of it in the middle ground, or a big huge battery that just holds all of this perfect energy that you can accumulate throughout the day. You just wait a couple days and you have a full store, and then hopefully over time you don't use as much as you do as the wind and solar that can be gained throughout the day. But here's where things get weird, because we're gonna move on. We're almost at an hour. This might be about an hour and a half podcast, but it is tradition here at Chat with Gunner and Chat with Ethan that we talk a little crazy. And we're not going to get too crazy. We've been pretty good on topic here tonight, but I've got to ask you if there is, if you have any conspiracy theories that you care to share with us, that you personally prescribe to, and obviously conspiracy theories get kind of bad rap nowadays. There are some crazies out there that believe really crazy shit on either side. It's not like a single political party is super crazy because they believe all these X, Y, and Z conspiracy theories, but there are a lot of conspiracy theories, especially throughout the years. There's the moon landing, which I think we've gotten to the moon. I think that's pretty obvious. You can literally take a telescope and look upstairs and just look at the moon and see that there's not people on it. There's places that they've literally stood on. But for you, especially in Australia, a place that is entirely different from America, or not entirely, but what is a conspiracy theory that you have heard that you're like, okay, maybe it's true?
I think that there are some very, very big companies and conglomerates still around, and I think it will come to light over the next 10 years or so that they have put a lot more resources into the media, into keeping a handle on the media than we've seen before. And also that corporate and national interests are not all that, they're not in separate magisteria. We've all heard about lobbying, and lobbying isn't a matter of, in most places lobbying isn't a matter of, oh no, the companies are paying the politicians. It's a matter of, oh no, the companies are able to hire people who are very, very good at talking with politicians and convincing them of their interests. The very biggest companies in the world at the moment, in terms of media power, are probably the big tech companies. There was a recent kerfuffle in the news between Google, Facebook, and the Australian government, because the Australian government is trying to get social networks and Google to pay the Murdoch media machine to advertise their news stories on those platforms, which is very strange. But the result so far has been Facebook in Australia at the moment. You can't get to or link to any news stories from any source on Facebook in Australia.
We did mention that. I guess it was last week, because everything kind of happened right around Thursday, Wednesday last week. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, I might be able to talk a little bit better on this because it is sort of my realm of expertise as far as media and social media. But yeah, no. So the Australian government passed a law that basically said, hey, Facebook, Google, you guys have been spending your time developing this scraping of news sources. Used to, when they first came about, and Google and Facebook had these news brackets for, you just swipe over and you have a whole tab on their pages that say news. You can listen, you can find these articles and you could read those articles. And used to, those articles, links would just be links. They would just go straight to these websites that would have their own ads. They would have their own, all of this and that. It would just be straight from Google or Facebook, and it would go straight to the news site. And that's where the news site still made their ads, and everything was peachy. However, Google, Facebook, being the types that they are, being multi-billion-dollar companies that are looking to just keep all the money for themselves, said, what if we made algorithms and software to just scrape these news articles? We don't have to link to them. We just take whatever's in them and then just put it on our own page, and we can put our own ads on it. Well, that's where money doesn't go to the right hands. The news companies are doing their work. There are journalists out there that were doing plenty of fine work, but they weren't making the money for the people reading their articles because Google and Facebook were making that money. And so Australia, and personally I find it, even though you have mentioned that one person owns all of your news, Claude, I think it is sort of a low punch straight to Google and Facebook to say, hey, you guys are making money over people that should be really kind of making the money because they're doing the work and you're just getting all of the ads from their work. I am a big proponent for breaking up some big tech companies because they're a little too powerful, especially with Facebook basically just saying, hey, Australia, you don't get the news. You don't get any of it. It is, and I said this last week, it is a shot across the bow. It may go down in history, depending on how everything pans out. It may go down in history as a shot heard around the world, or heard around the internet, because that's huge. Like, one company just being able to be like, you don't get to link to anything. You don't get to read your own news. You can go somewhere else. Like, that's crazy. Now, personally, I don't know how many people are using Facebook for their news. If you are, good for you. I have plenty of other websites that you can go to find your news. If you use Google News, just don't. Just go to wherever you're thinking that you might find good news. Go to CNN and then go to Fox News. Look at both of them and just see. They're probably all half right, so the truth is somewhere in the middle. Just a thought. Anyway, but yeah, no. What was you live in Australia? What was what was the reaction for people when Facebook basically just said, you don't get to link to news?
A lot of people are actually quite happy that Facebook is once again a place where you interact with people and not a place where you throw content at each other. It's a lot of people are kind of like, well, it was already kind of sketchy to be trying to get your news from there, and people who only use Facebook for their digital interaction won't add anything else to it. They will just start interacting with different stuff on Facebook, which is actually kind of nice. The other thing is, in the general case, we expect if a company is providing a space for people to communicate, it's generally on the company's terms. The trouble is when they get so big that said space is a substantial chunk of the conversation, or of a nation's communication. And in the past, that would be the time where governments go, "Hey, this sounds like a great time to nationalize this industry."
Yup. You're speaking my language, Kavoth. You're saying exactly what I've been saying. Again, we probably just think alike because we grow up in this society and we're just like, there are ways that we could change this. Why isn't anybody changing it? I think we need another Teddy Roosevelt to just to break up all of these major companies. That's something he did back when he was president. That was fast. If you know nothing about American history, there are a couple presidents you should look into: George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt. The man was a legend. He was all over the political spectrum. He did stuff that everyone liked. It was amazing, and he was just a really interesting guy. But one of the things that he did was he broke apart. I forget the word now because my brain's mush. But
is he the one doing the trust busting?
Trust busting, that's what it is. He basically just like, hey, you're getting too big. Stop. And I think we just need that nowadays. Something that I've heard being passed around nowadays is an internet bill of rights, and it's a very American concept. Although Australia obviously probably has their own constitution and their own sort of bill of rights or what have you.
Federation.
Exactly. And for us, I mean, again, it's a very American concept because you say the words Bill of Rights. Everyone in America, if they had a decent public education, which that's a whole other thing, that's a whole other issue, but you definitely learned about the Bill of Rights and what it means and what they're meant for. And I think with the internet being as it is, I think we just kind of need that, at least in America. And I would hope that would extend out because Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, all of these places are an American company, or well, not yet. They are American companies separately. Let's hope they don't get all together.
Google owns.
Yes, Google owns YouTube, but as far as social media, you have the big three. It's Google for YouTube, which is still kind of a social media platform, I would consider. But then you have Instagram and Facebook, which are owned by Facebook, and then you have Twitter, which is on its own. And I think we just need this something to keep them all in check because, like you said, it is nice when Facebook or Twitter or YouTube isn't just politics and news and just hearing about how the world is ending in 10 minutes. It's very nice to have that human interaction. And not to necessarily hate on finding your news, where you find your family. Being on the internet, it is good to be informed. That is what the internet is made for. But being able to just say, all of these people, these specific people, don't get to do what everyone else is doing in what is considered by a lot of people the new public square. Because in America, again, we have our constitutional rights, our freedom of speech, and although it can be used and bastardized, to use a little bit of French there, although it can be abused and used incorrectly, there are a lot of people in America that still just say they still have the freedom of speech. They don't have the freedom of consequences. They still have to deal with whatever they said. But the government doesn't get to say what they can and can't say. And at this point, back in the early 1900s, I could go out into the public square and just say, you know what, Mark Zuckerberg, he's a dick. And obviously, I don't think that would get me necessarily banned from Google or Facebook or Twitter. But having certain opinions nowadays. Gunner would be all over this topic right now. But having certain opinions nowadays, whether you're right or wrong, I am not going to judge. But having certain opinions nowadays tends to get you either banned or removed or silenced. You don't get the same outreach that other people do, even though the things that are being said are factually accurate, that have facts behind them, especially after current events that have happened in America. I have heard a lot and looked into a lot of what has happened here recently, and have seen a lot of facts that are not being talked about, that I just don't hear anybody talking about, even though they're currently being proven. That for some reason, if you say it on Twitter, the tweet gets taken down. All of this to say that I think nowadays, I'm rambling at this point. I think these days, and I'm sure you agree, if you don't, let me know, that we need to have rules in place that just apply to everybody across the board for the internet.
The part of the trouble with the very imagine a circumstance where you have a group of friends. You're at a party, and someone is being a dick, and you don't really want them around. So you go to the host of the party and say, "Hey, can we kick this guy out?" And they look over and say, "All right, let's get him out of here. Make sure he's not too drunk to drive, and just get him out of the room." That is a pretty normal sort of vibe in private rooms, in small private spaces. The problem with something like Facebook or Twitter is that it is a very, very big space that is private, and that it is owned and controlled by a company that is using it to make money. But it feels like a public space, and it's used like a public space by so many people. There are laws, especially in the US. There's along with the first thing that comes to mind is the common carrier law, but that's for ISPs, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
Is there a robust way for a company to host something that is legally a public space, that has all the properties of heading out into the town square with a megaphone? I'm not sure if that actually works properly at the moment. Or more specifically, I'm pretty sure it's not working properly, which is why we have these problems.
Yeah, no, I guess there's not really a way for that to necessarily work in a technical aspect. But I don't know. There's just this feeling that I've had looking at social media, because I don't even really use social media that much. But I have friends, again, a group of friends that feel like they're informed because they get their news from Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's frustrating because even going back to the climate change, debate, I bring up, hey, there's X, Y, and Z going on in the world that, there's that one Asian country in Central Asia that is pumping the air full of gases and the water full of pollutants that maybe we should be worrying about a little bit more than us here on good old the American USA, or Australia or England or Germany. All of these places that are super gung-ho about climate change, that even if we, all decide, hey, we're cutting emissions, we're going to zero, and we all do that, there's still this one problem that we really just need to talk about. We don't need to deal with it in any major sense. I would hope that it doesn't come to that, but there's this conversation that needs to happen about different things and different cultures. I mean, it is kind of a cultural thing that unless we do, there's not really going to be a change, and a lot of people just don't want to hear it, and then you get yelled at on the internet, which shouldn't really bother me at this point. I've been yelled at on the internet for quite a while. But yeah, no, it's just it's one of those things where I feel like unless we all have the freedom to say and be fact checked, don't get me wrong. If I'm wrong on anything, I would love to know. I need to know. That's how we learn as a human. You just learn by making mistakes and being told that was a mistake. But there's just this air of people thinking that that everything's a-okay when you look at it from a certain point of view and everything's going wrong. And big tech is just the first step. Good Lord.
Which actually brings us circling back to that feeling of doom that pervades a lot of young cohorts these days. Ecological grief is a studied phenomenon, also known as climate grief. It's that feeling you get when you hear about enormous, horrible things happening in the world that feel inevitable.
I mean,
it's been
yeah. There's just this feel like every time something major happens, and I've noticed this. I'm sure everyone has noticed this. It's not that hard to notice, but there's just this. You could be going about your day. You could be doing anything you're doing, and then you get the news of something. Hell, here in the studio, we have Chris, we have Sting. They are both decent basketball fans. Chris is a massive basketball fan. And this is totally not related to climate change or ecological stuff, right. But Kobe Bryant dying last year, right around this time. I remember I heard it, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's." It sounds silly for me because I don't follow basketball, but I was just like, "Wow, that's massive." And then I got to the studio, and there was a rain cloud in every single room of this place. It was just, whew. Everyone was sad. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to talk at all. And you sort of get that when, especially last year, Kavath, your country was on fire. Literally on fire.
It was eerie. Yeah, it was eerie.
And even in America, every time it was brought up, it's just, oh man, the entirety of Australia right now, every province or little, I don't know what you guys call them, states.
We have just a small number of very, very big states.
Yes. So every state, which again, you have 4 of them. It's not as huge as saying it as, America, but there were the fires. You see. I remember there was one night we started D&D, and I looked at a map of every wildfire that was being reported for, I think it was like 72 hours, and just the entirety of Central Australia, just nothing but red. And there's just that rain cloud that comes over everybody I know that talks about it. It's just like, oof. I think the word of the generation is OOF. Oof.
On a more optimistic note, a lot of it comes from the fact that we do hear about it at all. 60 years ago, you'd have a hard time even learning that much detail about the affairs of any other country. 200 years ago, you'd have a hard time learning that much detail about something happening in the city 100 miles away. We're in a place where we have the luxury of our problem being, how do I figure out which of this information is right and which of this information is useful, instead of trying to get any information at all.
I guess, yeah. Thinking back to what I've been saying, it's just like, wow, this is such a first world problem. I am so privileged in the fact that I get to complain about all of this. You're
allowed to have problems in the first world.
Well, yes, but 50 years ago, I would have been more worried about, hey, where am I going to get my next meal from? Well, maybe not 50. 100 years ago, I'd be worrying about, where am I going to get my next meal? And now I just worry about, man, people are wrong on the internet. So, moving on, moving a little bit further, because there's something that I think Gunner has mentioned that maybe I need to talk about with Gunner because I'm sure he'd be fascinated with it. And you're an engineer, you may know a lot more than I do. But back to conspiracy theories, back to weird stuff, because they're interesting topics. What's your vibe of Tesla?
Tesla. It is pretty cool. It's doing pretty cool stuff at the moment because
I didn't mean Tesla the company. I meant Nikolai Tesla. The man.
Tesla is the sort of person that if he were born in a slightly different age would have been burned at the stake as a witch. He, a bit like Archimedes, developed a lot of stuff that was sufficiently beyond the scope of the technology of the time that we've kind of followed the same route of his ideas much later after he died. I haven't actually read a biography or similar for Tesla, but he did a lot, and he just happened to not be a businessman, and that was the whole problem.
Yeah, no, he like died he died in poverty, which fascinates me because you think about it now and you're like, just about everything that I'm looking at in this room, if Tesla was born 50 years later, he would have probably been the person that invented it. Like, I mean, the biggest thing that people know of. Go ahead.
He came a long time before semiconductor technology. Like, microchips are very, very new. Newer than a lot of our cultural norms. But yeah, definitely one of the great minds, as it so speaks. His old debate between AC current versus DC current is taught in schools as part of history, but these days we use both in most applications.
There's something about the guy that always fascinates me. Every time I think about it, it's just like, who has a better track record for having ideas that eventually were just like, oh, he was on the right track. He knew what he was talking about. Like, I've heard so many different things. The guy made a death laser. Purportedly, he made a death laser that worked, but he didn't kill anybody with it. But he also had these ideas of free energy. And now this is where the conspiracy theory in me comes out is, have you looked up like the Nikola Tesla, like energizing the air to make energy free?
We have a very good understanding of the rules of thermodynamics these days. The fundamental rules of physics are so called because they are things that we have never seen violated in the entirety of the universe. Not once in all of history has energy come from nothing, as far as we can tell. Which is why there is such an incredible burden of proof for things like perpetual motion machines. Energy for free.
Well,
the closest thing we get is going to be fusion power, maybe in 50 years. It's hard to judge, or fission power. Compared to the things of the day, fission power is very close to free energy. It is millions of times more energy per unit weight than oil.
Oh Lord, I saw something. I think I was going to send it to you. It was people were handing out lollipops, dum-dums. I don't know if you guys have those in Australia, but there were dum-dums with little notes attached to them, and the note just said, if you use nuclear fission, you could use a piece of, an isotope that is the size of this dum-dum, the size of a lollipop, and it could power an entire city for 84 years. And then, after those 84 years, You could get rid of the only nuclear waste you have is the same size as that little lollipop. That's all you have as far as raw, radioactive material. And even that is only going to be radioactive for, well, they say only 1,000 or so years. And we've had the conversation of far into the future what the Earth may be like, and isn't there a concept for these places that we're going to have on Earth, or maybe on Mars, because we use fusion or fission power on Mars, that are just massive waste dumps for fission material and just radioactive material that are just barren wastelands that we have to bury into the ground, a quarter mile and then cover it in concrete for 5 layers.
So first point of clarification.
Go right ahead.
Fusion power doesn't make that kind of a waste.
Okay.
Second point of clarification. This, like you said, with the lollipop, the amount of this dangerous waste that is produced is really, really small compared to the amount of power you get. There is a site in, I can't remember which country, where nuclear waste is being buried very, very deep in stable rock, essentially.
Okay.
Deep into the bedrock, where it's not going to get disturbed by geological processes for hundreds of thousands of years long past. It's a problem. And yeah, compared to what you can do with that power, those sites are tiny. Those sites are very, very small. In the future, if we start using fission power, in space applications, or at least more, there actually have been fission reactors run in orbit. Then the problem gets even easier because space is enormous. You can just kind of leave things alone, and they will never hit anything.
I imagine the option in space would just be, wow, we have all of this nuclear fuel that has been expended after so long in space. We're just going to fling it at the nearest star and hope for the best.
Alas, throwing something at the sun is actually very, very difficult. It takes a lot of power to slow down, essentially, so that you actually fall into the sun instead of orbiting around it.
Oh my gosh! Could you imagine some idiot in space when we're a spacefaring civilization just throws some of his nuclear waste out and he just tosses it towards the sun, and it just comes back around and eventually hits Earth and just absolutely destroys the place because nuclear radiation is just all over the place. You've caused a massive explosion. You've killed everything. Good job, that one guy.
That would take a lump of rocks like multiple kilometers across to be that bad,
I suppose. So, go ahead.
I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
Well, I was our last topic because we're going on an hour and 30 now. What's your? How about this? Would you go to Mars within the next 5 years?
I would not go to Mars within the next 5 years because people heading to Mars within the next 5 years, if there are any, which I don't think will be the case. I think we're looking at a human launch in 10 or 15 years. Those will be the pioneers, the astronauts, the test pilots, the employees. If I travel to Mars, which I do want to do, it'll be once that is like airliners were in the early 20th century. Once it is possibly expensive, but a travel option for the public. Which is a very different beast to what space travel is at the moment. Right now, it's test pilots, scientists, people who are employed by NASA and other space agencies or companies to do the work of figuring out how to space. But I would like to travel to Mars in my lifetime.
I just find it. Growing up, I wanted to be an astronaut. Of course, I did. I was a little kid in America. I went to Cape Canaveral. I went to Kennedy Space Center. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be an astronaut. And then I realized it's going to take a lot of work. You have to be a scientist because they are not just sending any old chump to space. Why would they do that? But it is very exciting that we're this close in such a short amount of time, especially in all of human history, that we're this close to going into space as a public commodity. Like, I think, although I don't like the guy, Jeff Bezos is saying that Sky Blue or Air Blue or whatever the heck his space company is called, they want to be doing outer Earth orbit mission, manned flights just to fly out there with people, with passengers. I have no idea why you would ever do that, but yeah, I mean, I just find it fascinating because, and I think me and Gunner talked about this last week. Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan show was saying that within the next 2 or 3 years, rockets should be able to go up into space and come back down and go up and go down just like an aircraft airliner would. And then within the next 5 to 10 years, we're looking at sending people to Mars. And currently, in my current state of being, if nothing changes, I would love to go to Mars. I would be the first person to go to Mars. I don't even care. You'd be in the record books for as long as humans exist. The first people to try and go to Mars. And if I got there, God, I wouldn't know what to do, but I'm here. So
do science.
I would get to do science. And I said last week, there's this feeling in me right now. I'm sort of getting back into science. I fell out of it because I was just getting tired, getting lazy. That depression of a generation was setting in as I was hitting my late teens, early 20s, and I just didn't care about science. I wasn't excited anymore, but I'm getting excited again. I'm looking at SpaceX and what they're doing. I'm looking at fusion and fission power. I'm looking at all these things that I may never, personally interact with at this point, but man, the world is still fascinating. There's plenty of stuff to learn. You should always be learning something. I think that's the entirety of what Chat with Gunner and Chat with Ethan kind of boils down to, especially saying that we're sort of a Joe Rogan's podcast. Joe Rogan's learning everything at any point in time. He's always looking to talk to somebody new and learn something new about the world. And I think that's where we're going to wrap up. It's an hour and 34. It's a good talk. Kavath, I appreciate you coming in. Well, not coming in. I thank you for phoning in, although I talked a little bit more than I think I was expecting to, just because I don't get to do this a lot. Those of you that have stuck around, thank you for listening to me, Ethan, your host. I don't necessarily want to be up here, but again, Gunner was fighting a grizzly bear. Let's check. He has beaten the grizzly bear. The grizzly bear has been defeated. Gunner beat up a grizzly bear in Yellowstone National Park. I probably legally can't say that. Gunner saw a grizzly bear for sure. That's what happened. I don't know anything else. Please don't take anything I just said as fact. I'm an idiot on the internet. I have no idea what I'm doing anymore. You can find us at YouTube, Facebook, right there, even though we don't really like them. Apple Podcast, where we're currently sitting at 69 reviews. If you have an iPhone, if you're listening to this on Spotify, go to Apple Podcast. If you have an iPhone, even if you have an Android, make an Apple account. Never use it again. But I just need you to go to Apple Podcasts on your phone, on your computer. Go give us a like. Give us a review, a 5-star review. If you don't give us a 5-star review, Gunner has personally said it is his mission to find anybody that gives us less than 5 stars and punch them in the face. I don't want you to get punched in the face. I don't want to get punched in the face. I went and gave us a 5-star review because I think we're a very good podcast. And if you stuck around this long, you obviously also believe we are a very good podcast. At least good enough to give an hour and 36 minutes of your time to us, and I very much appreciate that. You can also find us, as I was saying, on Instagram, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere you listen to your stuff, you can find us. Trust me. I put us there. And I guess that's it. Thank you for watching. It has been a very good conversation with a guy that knows a lot more about the universe than I do, and I hope you learned something. That's it. Good night.